This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson. Yes, hello, welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Harry Wilkinson. And this is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events, happenings in the world of politics, science, education, anything that we interact with on a weekly basis on the news or information front. And we take a look at it from a higher perspective. From a higher perspective, of course, I'm talking about a metaphysical perspective. With an understanding that much of what we engage in the world is, and this may sound corny, but it is truth, actually borne out by more and more research on the scientific front in quantum physics, that it's all illusion. It's all creation of our own higher selves, basically. Quantum physics is clearly showing how we are able to affect our environment, how these tiny particles are influenced by our thoughts, and how our energies create the world in which we are in. And that is the beginning of an understanding and a much wider and different worldview than we've ever had before from a materialistic perspective. It's a worldview that many mystics over the centuries have shared, but not so much the scientific community and the everyday people and, just average folks. For average folks, that's a little too out there, but less and less so. As more science bears it out, as more research comes to light, as more things are written about it, the average person begins to feel a little bit more comfortable with such ideas. I'm not saying they embrace them entirely, but they become less alien and more, you know what? I can see where that might actually be true. And that's the beginning of sort of a dawning of consciousness. And we've been talking about this, for months now. I've been calling that the transition era, this era that we live in where our worldview is changing, slowly but surely. And we've talked about different aspects of that, from politics to money, to our new technologies, which are changing the way that we interact with one another. And so we find ourselves in the midst of a changing perspective of how the world works. And included in that is a changing perspective on what health means, and a shift in priorities. Medical doctors, when they are trained in school, their training, and many doctors have spoken to this, their training is essentially about how to mask symptoms, how to step in and take care of symptoms once they arise, but very little is spent on prevention. And that priority is beginning to shift as we become aware of holistic medicine, as they call it. Now, by holistic medicine, what I mean is that there becomes an understanding that what is happening physically to your body has many connections. Okay, if you have a sore throat like I have this morning, is that just a result of too much phlegm, or having shouted too long and then the throat is raw? Or does it come from something else? And in my case, I'm quite aware that this sore throat of mine is a result of some um, emotional factors that I'm going through at the moment. Um, some news that I received that was, unsettling, and that's upset my equilibrium, and so as a result, uh, one of the things that manifested was this sore throat. Um, Part of it is due to some, uh, lack of sleep, but a lot of it is due to this emotional energy. Uh, so we see that all of these things impact. So since this is the Spirit and Wellness Show, and we often don't get a lot of time to spend on the wellness aspect of it, I am devoting this entire episode to uh, holistic and wellness ideas. So the first thing we're going to talk about is something that has been in the news lately, and that is research on what physical activity or lack thereof can do to the results of such lack of physical activity, and some ideas about how we can change that. So we'll be looking at some of it from the traditional perspective, and some of it from a more holistic perspective. So the big research has to do with, uh, particularly in particular, they're talking about TV watching and health, because sitting for long periods of time in front of the television, apparently, according to this research, raises the risk of many health problems. And the reason this research was done is, I think, a lot of it has to do with the rise of streaming services like Netflix, and the rise of what they call binge watching. And if you don't know what that is, binge watching is, for instance, Netflix will present, a series, a television series of episodes, maybe 12 episodes or more. And one of the fads now is to binge watch. That's to watch episode after episode of a show, back to back. And a lot of people are spending hours doing this. And so the research that was done was to see if this is, risking their health. And the answer to that is yes. So, and there's in June, this article came out about the new research on TV watching and how it raises the risk of, among other things, apparently diabetes. So as we binge watch on these things, you could be raising your risk of developing diabetes just by watching TV. And according to this research and other studies as well, every extra hour that a person with pre-diabetes spends watching TV each day raises their risk of developing full-blown type 2 diabetes by 3.4%. So that's every extra hour. However, in this study, number one, there's no proven cause and effect. But they are saying the increased risk associated with being a couch potato occurred whether or not the study participants were taking diabetes drugs or whether they were eating healthy diets and exercises, which is it's a little disturbing. The fact that even if you were eating healthy and exercising and taking diabetes drugs, those risks were raised just by sitting on the couch and watching television. The caveat to this, according to this study, was that people who were trying to prevent diabetes through healthy lifestyle changes ended up watching less television over time. So these are some troubling results. And the author of this study, Andrea Kriska, she's a professor of epidemiology at the University of Pittsburgh's Graduate School of Public Health. And what she says is, time goes on and people are less active and more overweight. The number of people at risk for diabetes is increasing by leaps and bounds. It's not a rare group of people who will be exposed to increased diabetes risk due to their sedentary habits. Now, the data that the study relies on came from participants in the prevention program for diabetes. And in this study, there were about 3,200 overweight adults and who were studied between 1996 and 1999. And the goal of the study was to delay or prevent type 2 diabetes in high-risk patients, either through a particular drug called metformin, or through lifestyle changes. And what it found was that if you ate right and you engaged in physical activity, that was the most successful route. And that resulted in 58% decrease in the development of diabetes compared to doing nothing. And by comparison, taking the drug metformin caused only a 31% decrease in diabetes development. So that in itself is a very interesting statistic. Because previous to this, the first thing doctors would do if someone looked like they were developing type 2 diabetes was put them on drugs. And now what this is showing, people are understanding, doctors are understanding, that it's not about the drugs, it's about what the person does with their life, how they eat and how they engage in physical activity, and how much they do it. So, it was proven that physical activity can forestall diabetes. Then they decided to go the opposite route and see whether sitting around for extended periods of time can raise diabetes risks. And prior research to this had indicated that long periods spent sitting motionless can have negative effects on metabolism. If you think about it, we all recognize the fact that when we sleep, our bodies are at rest, and everything sort of slows down. When we're sitting for long periods of time, our body also starts to slow down. It might not be in a sleeping state, but it goes into a more rested state, and things start to slow down. Now, before this study, participants in diabetes prevention programs all spent the same amount of time watching TV, about 140 minutes a day. So a little over 2 hours a day. But people engaging in lifestyle changes ended up reducing their TV time by about 20 minutes. So about 2 hours a day. By comparison, people taking the metformin drug reduced their TV watching by about 3 minutes a day. And those following no plan at all watched 8 minutes fewer per day. The researchers then investigated the impact of sedentary behavior over time on diabetes. For participants in all three of those groups, the risk of developing diabetes increased by about 3.4% for each hour spent watching TV. In addition to the impact on metabolism, sitting for long periods of time in front of the TV also can promote overeating. Because